Howdy all, good morning. It's great to see everybody. Thank you for your patience. We're having some hiccups back there again like we were Wednesday. We got them all figured out. I think we're ready to roll for the day. If someone were to come to you with the jaw-dropping news, today is the last day that you're going to spend on earth, how would that change the way you look at your life? How might it change the way you would live this final day? Or maybe they would say you just have a few days left. How would it change the way that you would carry out your final days? Our great king over Judah is going to receive this very news today. It's either today is the last day, or at most, you have a few days that are left in this place. How's that going to change the way he looks at life and the way that he lives? We're in 2 Kings chapter 20. If you'd like to follow along, that would be fantastic. 2 Kings 20, and we'll begin reading in verse number 1. 2 Kings 20, verse 1. In those days, Hezekiah, that's our king, of course, in the south of Judah, was sick, and he was near death. And he has the prophet to come in to him, and there's an announcement that's going to be made to the king. This announcement is this: Thus says the Lord, set your house in order, for you shall die and not live. I find it greatly tragic that Andre is not in this class with us, because a fellow OCDer would understand. However, I have my dear friend Adam, so that's all that I need, just someone to empathize with me. So if someone were to tell you this is the last day that you have to live, and you're lying on your bed in your house, and the Lord's told you this, set your house in order, for you shall die and not live. What does it mean to you to set your house in order? Let me tell you before you would rudely interrupt, Justin, that what this means for an OCDer is this is your last chance to open up your cabinets and to line up all your cans of vegetables and make sure all the labels are facing outward. It's your last opportunity. That's setting your house in order. That's all that it is, Justin. So we'll move on. And wait a minute. My fellow OCDer, go ahead, sir. Okay, all right. And in full disclosure, I don't do that, but I would love to. If life were more like it were about 15 years ago, I would love to do that. But yeah, I've given up on that kind of thing. All right, Justin, fine. Go ahead. Okay, good. So there could be a financial side of this. Hey, make sure all your ducks are in a row. Now, it does seem that at this point, Hezekiah doesn't have offspring. It would make a lot of sense if he's already married. That would probably be the case. So it could be to make sure that your loved ones, and especially spouse if applicable, are going to be taken care of. Could be one thing. All right, anything else? Set your house in order. How about this one right here? We could say, which would be in line with economics, but it could be other things too. Your will might be. Okay, plural. Thank you. Very good. That's fair. Okay. How about this one? Is there anything you need to rewire spiritually? Any odds and ends that need to be tied up there? You'll see some of the great men of God standing before the congregation of Israel. I think of someone like Samuel. Hey, before the whole assembly at the end of his life, if I've cheated anybody, if I've wronged anyone, please come let me know, and we'll fix that. So it might be one of those things also. Now, we know about this guy spiritually. He seems to have had his ducks in a row. He's had his life in order, so would it really be anything pertaining to that? Maybe. He's a human being. People make mistakes. So whatever it is, it could be loose, tie up those loose ends, whether it's economically, whether it's in your will, which could go beyond that, whether it's spiritually. Set your house in order, for you shall die and not live. What awful news to receive in a day. Right. So that could be a courtesy that's being paid by God. Hey, you've been this excellent servant of mine, and I'm letting you know ahead of time this is what's going to happen. So yeah, you could look at that. And also, as we're going to discuss in our worship today, that for a servant of God to hear that you're going to die actually really isn't the worst news that you could receive. So it could be an advertisement, hey, things are about to get better for you. That could be one way of viewing it. So what do you do when you receive the most awful news and you don't have a prayer? What do you do? Verse 2, here's what Hezekiah did. Then he turned his face toward the wall for some privacy, perhaps quiet also, and he prayed to the Lord. What do you do when you don't have a prayer? Well, when you're a servant of God, you always have a prayer. And so he turns to the one who can do anything. He turns to the one who built heaven and earth. He's the one who can stop the luminaries of the sky, as we're going to discuss in today's lesson. The God who can do anything and everything. The one who loves heavy lifting. He turned his face toward the wall when he has no prayer, and he prays to the Lord, saying, "Remember now, O Lord, I pray, how I have walked before you in truth with a loyal heart, and have done what was good in your sight." And Hezekiah wept bitterly. So this is the request that he makes before God. I don't know if it's the best terminology, but ever used this in prayer. I have. I don't know that I've used it for myself, but I've certainly used it for some incredible servants of God before. And I've begged, and I've learned this from Hezekiah. Remember now, O Lord, I pray, not about I, but about your servant and what they've done for you. How I have walked before you in truth. Let's break down each one of these and what he means by it. What would it tell you to walk before God in truth? Tell me more about truth. You followed God? Okay, anything else? Faithful? Good. So these things are synonymous with each other, but I think there's just a slight difference with each one. You might say an accuracy, okay, which would go back to what the Lord wants. Jesus' prayer, he says, God, I pray for your disciples to set them apart by your truth. And then he defines that as, what is the truth? He says, your word, John 17:17, is truth. So perhaps what Hezekiah is saying here is, I've walked before you according to your teachings, which would be in accuracy or in truth, and with a loyal heart. Remember our memory verse for just, what was it, last time? How everything he did, what did Hezekiah do it with? Everything he did for the Lord. He did it with his whole heart. He understands what true religion is. It's not something with which you simply tinker in rituals on the outside, but it begins from the inside and it overflows into every sphere of your existence. So what he says is God, not only have I done what you've told me to, my heart was behind everything that I've done for you. And that has to be a meaningful statement to the Lord. And he says, I have done what was good in your sight. This may be even above and beyond the demands of law. You have Romans chapter 5. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet perhaps for a good man would someone even dare to die. The righteous man is the one who's going to do everything that's right according to the strict dictates of law. The good man is above and beyond that. He's also going to do everything that mercy and love would suggest that he ought to do. And so I think what you have with Hezekiah in this prayer that he makes to God, he's saying, Lord, I've done my best to follow each one of your statutes as they're written down in your law. And when I did it, I performed them with every fiber of my being. And then even in areas where I felt like we're above and beyond law, I tried my best to do what I think you would want me to do, even though it might not technically be wrong if we would have done things differently. He's been a good guy. And then this statement's made, and Hezekiah wept bitterly. He's passionate about this request that he makes before God. Verse number 4, and it happened. Before Isaiah, okay, so this is the guy who has the 66 chapter book, the big long one that eventually we will get to, and we'll study together, and it'll take some time to get through it. There's a lot to it. One of the major prophets. It happened before Isaiah, the messianic prophet, had gone out into the middle court. Okay, let's pause right here for a moment. The middle court of the Jews. You have the temple or temple complex, and a part of that is the palace that's kind of connected, or a wing of it, and so this is where the king also resides. How many courts were there in the temple proper? Solomon's temple and the 2 future ones also. Anybody remember that? Not quite, but you're super close. It'd make a lot of sense. This is the temple, this is the house where God is worshipped. God's what number? Well, I mean, our God is one, right? But the divine number, and for good reason, persons of deity, of our one deity. So we have 3, and it's built this way. There are 3 courts. I doubt that's insignificant. Isaiah has left the palace, and he's going through the temple complex. I mean, it hasn't been that long ago that he left, probably 5, maybe at the most 10 minutes. And he's walking away, and he's passed through the first one, and we read right here that before he had gone out into the middle court, okay, so it sounds like it would still be in the first, the word of the Lord came to him saying, I need you to go back upstairs. I have another message I want you to deliver to the king. Poor Isaiah, he's getting his steps in today, isn't he? Couldn't God just have shared this with him prior? God knows all things, but he also knew what he wanted his servant Hezekiah to do. Listen, this is a great reminder for us. Matthew chapter 6, as Jesus would say it, and it's not exactly in these words, but it's implied. Prayer is not for God. Yes, we direct our prayers to God. We say things to God. We praise God. We ask Him for things that we need. For whom is prayer, really? Not that it's directed toward, but for whom is prayer? We need prayer. Why do we need prayer? God doesn't need prayer. He doesn't need anyone to tell Him how wonderful and awesome He is. He's humble, but He already understands that. It's reality for Him. God knows everything. He doesn't need for you or me to tell Him what our individual needs are, for anybody else's needs. He already grasps that. Jesus says, don't worry about the beautiful words that you want to say and you fail in articulating them, because your Father already knows everything that you need. That's not why you're praying. So why are we praying? God doesn't need to know how awesome He is. God doesn't need to know our concerns. I don't know that necessarily we need to know our concerns, but we do need to be reminded of what, Tony? That He is awesome. And I know we know that, but sometimes we don't really dwell on it and appreciate it as we should. It allows us to redirect our minds to make sure that our trust is always in Him and not in ourselves to get things done. So God knew all along what's going to be done with Hezekiah. He knew all along that Isaiah is going to have to get his steps in for the day and go back, but He's done this, I'm convinced, for the king's benefit, so that he could be reminded of his dependence on the Lord. So it happens before Isaiah had even gone out into the middle courts. He's only made it to the first one, getting ready to pass through the second and the third. God says, whoa, 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 whoa. Need you to go back upstairs, or wherever it is. And He says, I want you to return and tell Hezekiah, the leader of my people, thus says the Lord, the God of David, your father, I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. Surely I will heal you. On the 3rd day you shall go up to the house of the Lord. So 2 things for God here. Number 1, He says, I have listened to what you've told me. And what a blessing for us when we don't have a prayer, as anyone in the world would see it. When we serve the living God, we always have a prayer. And He always listens. He's always concerned about what's on our hearts. I have heard your prayer, and I've done a study on this before. This is one of my favorites. When God's people shed tears, the Lord's aware, and He cares. It's not just that you said something, he says, I've watched you. And it's touched my heart, knowing how much this touches your heart. Roy? Yeah, very good, Roy. Thank you. I'm just like you. It moves me for sure. And I hope it reminds us, as Hezekiah states, it's not just what we do that's important, although it's very significant, but as well as how we do it, how passionate we are about our service to God, about our connection to the Lord. Makes a big difference in every facet, including in our prayer lives. Surely, he says, on this basis, because I've heard your prayer, I've seen your tears, surely I will heal you. On the third day, you shall go up to the house of the Lord. Do you think that's an accident? On the third day. Why not the first? Why not the second? Why not the fourth? The divine's getting involved, right? On the third day, the divine number, you shall go into the house of the three divine number, the Lord, deity. Verse 6, he says, and I will add to your days 15 years. I mean, this guy's on his way out. He's on borrowed time. He's going to have this day, probably, or a chunk of it, maybe at the most a few days. No, he says, I'm going to give you 15 additional years. He's in the midst of a calamity right now that we haven't discussed, and we'll begin that next week in chapters 18 and 19 of 2 Kings. I've intentionally gone to 20 first. He says, I will deliver you in your current calamity in this city from the hand of the king of Assyria, and I will defend this city for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. When exactly does this take place? God says, I will add to your days 15 years. I ask you to look back with me in chapter 18 of 2 Kings. And we haven't really covered this yet. We will more thoroughly next week. But chapter 18, verse 2, we're told that Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became king. Okay, let's talk numbers. We can crunch these. And he reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem. And as is typical with the kings, he's going to die while he's in office serving as king. So how old was he when he died? He would be 54, right? Okay, so he's 54 years old when he dies. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. All right, so now that we understand he's 25 when he becomes king, he reigns for 29 years. That means he's 54 years old when he dies. Now go back to where we are today in chapter 20. Down in verse 6, God says, I will add to your days 15 years. So we're at 54 when he dies. 54 minus 15. How old is he when this takes place? 39. He's a pretty young guy, isn't he? I might be a little partial. This is coming out of the mouth of a 39-year-old, so this kind of hits. Anybody else 39 this year? All right, yeah. Oh, the good life, isn't it? Yeah. Huh? I'm sorry, I missed it. Oh, I got you. Okay. Sorry, that's why I didn't. Yeah. Thanks. Maybe I can stay there too, Miss Barbara. That'd be nice. All right, let's see. But can you imagine? Like if this year a doctor walks in and says, get everything in line, it's going to be a few days at most, maybe even today, it's going to happen. You wouldn't expect that, would you, at 39 years old? And isn't it kind of sad, too, that this guy is such a great king? Why would God let something happen to him and potentially go before he's even 40 years old, for the nation's sake, if nothing else? I'm going to suggest to you there might be more going on here than what meets the eye. We know the way our king has begun his reign. It's been phenomenal. It's continued for a number of years. Through the years, I think kind of like Solomon, like David, like all of us, there have been some chinks in the armor that have worked their way in, and I think that might have something to do with this. I think this is some sort of a test, maybe even a little bit of a wake-up for God's righteous king. We'll see if we can identify anything that might be a little off as we go through. But he says, God speaking, I will deliver you from this city from the hand of the king of Assyria. Notice what he speaks here. And I will defend this city. Why? For my own sake, because of who I am, and this is known as my city, number one. And number two, I will defend this city for the sake of my servant David, like whom Hezekiah has lived for so many years. But notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, and I will defend it for your sake. Now you think he would, from the way Hezekiah has lived before him. Has something crept into Hezekiah's life that's putting a wedge between him and his God? Verse 7, then Isaiah said, take a lump of figs, and they took and laid it on the malignant boil, and he recovered. And Hezekiah said to Isaiah, what is the sign that the Lord will heal me? Obviously, this is before the healing takes place. What is the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up to the house of the Lord on the third day? So God has dispatched his prophet, and Hezekiah knows very well by this point who Isaiah is, someone to be trusted. And he says, hey, great news. God's going to spare your life. He's going to defend the city against the Assyrians and this besiegement that's come up against you all. And life will be good again. And his response to this is, well, do you have a sign to give me that I know this is the truth? This could be taken one of two ways. Turn to Isaiah. We've invoked the prophet's name, so let's go to the book that he wrote, the 66 chapters, and read just a little sliver from Isaiah chapter 7, and it'll be in verses 10 through 14. Before we do so, though, what's this guy's name? Not his name, but what's his dad's name again? Hezekiah's dad. What's his name? Ahaz, right? And he's gone by now. He's dearly departed. But I want to look back when King Ahaz was ruling over the territory. Chapter 7 of Isaiah and verse 10. Again the Lord spoke to Ahaz, ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, and I will not put the Lord to the test. Which sounds very noble in one sense. But here's the issue. God told the king, hey, I've given this revelation of how, same thing kind of with Hezekiah, I'm going to intervene and help out with your enemies and what's going on in the land. But he says, I will not ask a sign when God tells him to ask a sign. Now, if God tells you to do something and you say, no, I'm not going to do it, and here are my reasons behind it, that's a problem, right? That's defiance. It's disobedience. And so he disobeyed the Lord because God told him to ask for a sign. And he said, that's Isaiah in verse 13, hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary men that you weary my God also? God told you to ask for a sign, and you won't do so. And you've disobeyed him in that. But guess what? God's going to give you a sign anyway, that his word can be trusted. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. This is kind of strange, because this prophecy takes place in approximately 750, some would say a little closer to 700 BC, and this prophecy isn't fulfilled until when? It's about Jesus. And you want to see a sign, he says, I'm going to show you and your people a sign, but it's not going to be till I send my own son. Essentially is what he's saying. Some believe this is a dualistic fulfillment, and that this was fulfilled back in the time there, and then also it would be fulfilled. I'm not completely convinced of that, in fact, at all, myself. I think it's unique for the Christ, for God's own Son himself. But my point in reading that passage is this. What Hezekiah might be thinking is, oh, well, I've seen this play out with my dad before, and that when a great prophecy is given about military victory, that then you can request a sign that is to take place from God, that this thing is true. That could be what's going on right here. But if that is the case, what's the difference between what happened with Ahaz and what's going on now with Hezekiah? Military conflict, God makes a promise, hey, sign, but what's the difference? Okay, very good. Excellent, Justin. In the case of Ahaz, God told him to do it. In the case of Hezekiah, he didn't tell him. Now, why do you think it possible that Ahaz would have needed to see a sign when God tells him something's going to happen? What do we know about Ahaz? Not a good guy, not super affiliated with the God, the true God of Israel, or if you prefer at this point, Judah. So he probably needs some reinforcement because he's not like a super faith-filled guy. What do we know about Hezekiah? He is a man of faith through and through. And God doesn't tell him to ask for a sign, possibly because he expects more out of him than what he did at his dad. But the fact that Hezekiah says, hey, I need to see a sign to know God would actually do this thing, might signify that there's a lack of faith on his part. Turn to Matthew chapter 12. You recall what Jesus had to say about a people that asks for signs? Not the best, huh? Matthew chapter 12, verse 38. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered him, saying, Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you, from all these teachings that he's giving. But he answered them, an evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign. Notice, see if this sounds familiar. But no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. What does he mean by that? We studied that. Was it last week? For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. These people say, oh, teacher, you're providing all this instruction. You need to give us a sign so we know that we can trust you, as if he's not giving enough already. And Jesus tells them, well, it's a perverse generation, a faithless, a disobedient people who requires a sign for every time God tells you there's something that he wants done. He says, you want a sign? Oh, you're going to be given a sign. And what's the fulfillment? What's the sign that will be provided? He says, the sign's going to be fulfilled in me. Now think back with Ahaz and the parallels between those. Hey, ask any sign you want. Now in his case, no, I'm not going to ask a sign. He disobeys God because he tells him to ask for a sign. But he says, I'm going to give you a sign anyway, and it's going to be fulfilled in whom? In my Son. So you see the similarities between the two of those. Returning to 2 Kings 20, verse 8. Hezekiah said to the prophet Isaiah, what is the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up to the house of the Lord the 3rd day? Then Isaiah said, this is the sign to you from the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing which he has spoken. Shall the shadow go forward 10 degrees or go backward 10 degrees? And he's talking about, as we're going to find out, on the sundial of his dad, Ahaz, the ancient clock. And Hezekiah, listen to his response, answered, it is an easy thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees. But no, let the shadow go backward 10 degrees. All right, so there are 3 things that have shown up here. First of all, God doesn't say, I'm going to defend this city for the sake of you, my king, the ruler. It's for 2 other people, one of whom is himself. Secondly, Hezekiah seems not to have faith in the word of the Lord that's been spoken. And so he asks for a sign. God acquiesces. And he gives his ruler a sign. He says he's going to. And he says, which one do you want happen? Do you want time to rewind or do you want time to fast forward? Which would you prefer? His response is, oh, well, that's too easy for time to fast forward. I want time to rewind. Really? You ever fast forwarded time? VCRs, DVD, and Blu-ray players don't count, by the way. So, have you ever fast forwarded time? No one has ever done that in the history of the universe. And he considers that not to be enough to be done. No, he says, you're going to have to rewind time. God's very kind and patient about this. Verse 11, so Isaiah the prophet cried out to the Lord, and he brought the shadow 10 degrees backward, by which it had gone down on the sundial of Ahaz. Now, there are 2 ways that this could happen. One is that it could just be the shadow itself, or it could be that the sun itself moved. I'll let you ascertain which one you believe it to be, but I think it's the sun itself that went back. Is that not crazy that that can be controlled by anyone? And God shows his power in this, whereby his servant, his king, knows. One thing I want to read really quickly, the parallel, 2 Chronicles chapter 32. And if you're interested, you can keep your spot here. We'll actually close in this location in just a little bit. 2 Chronicles chapter 32. Notice what's stated in verse 31, just the beginning of it. And so in the matter of the envoys of the princes of Babylon. If you give me just a sec, I'm going to switch our screens right now. And we're going to go to our map. So in Judah and Jerusalem, down to the southwest portion of the screen, and then you have over, for sure due east, maybe a little bit north, the place of Babylon, which is not the mighty world empire right now. It's just a city-state and growing at this point. You see the Assyrian Empire, that's the major world mover at this juncture. Okay, so it's Babylon, which right now is small, but, growing a little bit. Verse 31, and so in the matter of the envoys of the princes of Babylon, who had been sent to him to inquire about the sign that had been done in the land. This is something that everybody perceived taking place. I think it's the movement of the sun itself. These people show up and they know something's happening, and perhaps they've heard the rumor that, this is the God of the Israelites again. He's the one who does the big things. He's the one who parts the sea. He's the one who backs up for tens of miles the flooded Jordan River. They've heard about this God. This is the God that can stop the sun. This is the God that can fast forward the movement of the sun, that can rewind the sun. This is a God that can do a lot of things. And they want to know more about what it is that this God of Israel had done. Yes, sir. Oh, it stopped the sun? Yeah, good. Joshua chapter 10 is another instance. This isn't the only time this has ever happened. Joshua 10, he stopped the movement of the sun. Absolutely. Fascinating stuff, but anyway, we're going to have to move on from that. So 2 Kings 20, we're back to our location here. Verse 12, at that time, Berodach-Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he heard that Hezekiah had been sick. What a sweet man. He cares about the king of Israel, of whom he probably knows next to nothing. These guys over in the east, the northeast, you don't always want to trust these fellows, right? They might have ulterior motives, and I think that's probably the case right here. Hezekiah, though, doesn't pick up on this flattery that's taking place. He was attentive to them. And he showed them all the house of his treasures. Remember how rich he is? He's kind of like Solomon. Probably not to that extent, but he's a very wealthy man. The silver and gold, the spices and precious ointment, and all his armory, all the defense of the country. He shows them everything, all that was found among his treasures. There was nothing in his house or in all his dominion that Hezekiah did not show them. Then Isaiah the prophet went to King Hezekiah and said to him, what did these men say, and from where did they come to you? So Hezekiah said, they came from a far country, from Babylon. Oh, really? Really? So what takes place then in this conversation in our memory verse? 2 Kings 20, verse 15. Go ahead, Roy. You ever thought about that question? Powerful. Hey, when the visitors came from afar, when the godless people walked in, what did they see in your house? And I think this is probably more than just, the visually appealing things or not so much or anywhere between. I think this is maybe more along the lines of what did they see that is really important to you? What did you have to share with them? And so what did Hezekiah have to share with them? Okay, yeah, good. You're right. So a couple things. First of all, personally, he showed him how rich he was and all the success he had had. All right? These guys, remember, they've come, at least in part, to find out about what? Okay? Him being sick, and from the 2nd Chronicles passage, what else do they want to know? They want to know about the sign the God of heaven had shared. This is a great opportunity for him to tell them a whole lot more about the God of Israel, how awesome he is. And he could explain, hey, look, all this success we've been given in this land is because of our God. Maybe he did mention those things, but we sure have no record of it if he did so. Instead, it's look at all of my stuff. Look at all of my gold and my silver, and here, smell this cologne. That's a nice one. You bet you never had that scent over in the Northeast, have you? and all this stuff that he shows them, hey, look at all the defense of our country. We're strong, aren't we? It's like all about, it seems, himself and his people and all that they have done. and the success that they enjoy. Instead of giving credit to God, telling them about their Lord, and probably keeping some national secrets from people who very likely cannot be trusted. I give him credit. He's honest. He says, I showed them everything in my house. I showed them everything in our country. There is nothing that I haven't shown them. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days are coming when all that you've shown them, all that is in your house, and what your fathers have accumulated until this day, shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. Everything you show them is everything that's going to be gone. And they shall take away some of your sons, who shall descend from you, whom you will beget, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. First of all, you'd hate that your offspring is going to become slaves of another land anyway. But secondly, at that, the fact that they're going to be eunuchs serving another empire, what does that suggest about them and the family? Eunuchs. They cannot, I'm sorry. Very good. That's what, yeah. That there will not be offspring that will continue through at least the ones that are carried off, right, and made captives. Listen to this, though. So Hezekiah said to Isaiah, the word of the Lord which you have spoken is good. I don't know if that's the reaction I would have from this. Oh, we're going to lose all of our stuff, our family line, all of these things. How could this be a good thing? He says, for will there not be peace and truth, at least in my days? Hey, this is great. I get to continue living life as I have. Yeah, this is going to happen to your kids and your grandkids and your family line. Whatever. Life's going to be good for me. This isn't too bad. Another chink in the armor. Faithlessness, perhaps some disobedience is suggested. And here, what do we have? Utter selfishness. James 3, 16 through 18. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing is found. There are some seeds right now in Hezekiah's heart that are not good. A lack of faith, selfishness. Let's see if that leads to anything greater down the road. 20 and 21. Now the rest of the acts of Hezekiah, all his might, and how he made a pool and a tunnel and brought water into the city, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? So Hezekiah rested with his fathers, then Manasseh his son reigned in his place. What we take from today's study, a number of things, but among them all, perhaps the greatest, is it's so important every individual decision that we make today. And it's not necessarily for what's going to happen to us today. But rest assured that our decisions that you and I make today are going to have a tremendous impact on the future of our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. So even if we're not as concerned about us and what happens today, let's be concerned about the generations that are going to come after us, because our decisions make a big difference in their future. We'll close there for today. Next time, if you will, please read the 18th chapter. We dabbled in it just a hair, but we'll go through the entirety of that next time. 2 Kings 18, and I love this one, verse 5. Verse 5 to memorize in 2 Kings 18. Any other thoughts you would like to bring out as we do close from 2 Kings 20? John? Right. Yeah, great thoughts, John. It's a milliliter dropper into the ocean is what it is. It's humbling to consider, isn't it? Yeah, yet it's this one little tiny speck that affects all of the other grains that you see. Yeah, it is. Yeah, thank you for that, John. Okay, thank you for the class. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. In verse 5 memory, yes. All right, thanks.